Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. When Bob reached out to me about 3-4 weeks ago about moderating this program, I wasn't so sure because of my role as an alderman. But if you really think about it, if you're a moderator, you're kind of supposed to stay in the middle of the road and just keep things moving along. So I'm happy to have that role here this morning. But before I get started, I'm gonna share with you some research that I did regarding this particular issue. But prior to that, I thought I'd introduce our panelists who've agreed to help us out this morning. If you raise your hand, Mr. Zirkle, Jim Zirkle, yes. The city's President Corporation Counsel. Jim has been in his position since May of this year, but he has a distinguished legal career in both the private and public sector. He was actually Corporation Counsel under Mayor Ozzie Langfelder, and Assistant Corporation Counsel under Mayor Houston back in the late 70s, early 80s. And to his left, Alderman of Ward 7, Joe McMenamin. Joe is no secret, an attorney here in town, private office, and has been on the council since 2011. Isn't that right, Joe? Okay. And to his left, Ward 10 Alderman Ralph Hanauer. Ralph? Hello there. Ralph works in IT with the state of Illinois. I've been doing that for a great number of years and is happy to be here today. I can tell by his smile. And to his left is Carol Sutton. Carol is a trustee from Woodside Township. Carol, how long have you been on the board of Woodside Township?
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. I don't remember. It's 20 plus years. I think we've run 5 times, so we're over 20 years. And in 17 we run again, so I'll run for another term then.
And if you like Mustangs, he's your guy, so just keep that in mind. You know, last night I was out with my wife, and she said to me, Jim, we need to stop by our neighbor's house. And if anybody knows me, I like to kind of stay on schedule, and I'm not one to like to veer off the predetermined course, but of course, like any good husband, you comply. And we were going by our neighbor's house. My wife's a room mother for my daughter's 8th grade class, and she said, we're going to go pick up from our neighbors who work at Mellow Cream, we're going to go pick up some donut holes. And I got all excited. I said, wow, you actually are helping me out, and you remembered that I have this hole in the donut presentation on Friday. And she looked at me and she goes, what are you talking about? And said, don't get too excited. These are for the Christmas party for the 8th grade. So sorry I tried. But anyway, on that note, I wanted to share with you some research that I did regarding the hole in the donut topic. And these are from actual newspaper articles from the State Journal Register. And I'm going to read to you the headlines of these articles and then just a few comments that I've highlighted. And then we're going to turn it over to Mr. Zirkle, who's going to kick off our presentation today. But this headline says, Common Questions Concerning Proposed Annexation Answered. Question: what is the city annexing? The answer is the city will use long-standing annexation law to take in all unincorporated areas, 60 acres or less, that are surrounded by one or more, of course, the city of Springfield. Why does the city want to annex these areas? Well, Mayor Langfelder said such a move would add population to the city of Springfield. And then some of the council members said this does not appear to, however, the council does not appear to ready to make a drastic move, even though the city would benefit from more property taxes and larger share of certain taxes. For example, state motor fuel tax, which is based on population. The next question was, what will this do to tax bills? The answer is the new residents would be relieved from paying fire protection taxes. However, there will be a slight increase in real estate taxes due to the different taxing districts. However, Langfelder points out that higher taxes will offset, at least in part, by lower electric and water rates. The next question was, will students be forced to change school districts? Well, the answer is no. Okay, the next one I wanted to talk about is the headline is, the city needs to annex surrounding parcels. This was actually an editorial in the newspaper. Said the city of Springfield has a chance Tuesday to make its first step towards a badly needed annexation policy by approving the ordinance annexing some of the property scattered throughout the city. The last city council had the same opportunity and refused to meet that responsibility. The so-called hole in the donut hole legislation is being used. The next headline, annexation plan will likely be approved. Okay, there's a quote. My only reservation, this is from one of the aldermen, my only reservation I continue to have is whether this will mean any new financial commitment for the city to shoulder. I don't want to do that if it means that we have to reroute money away from projects that are badly needed in the city. The next headline, City Council approves annexation. Okay, you're thinking what? Those of you who follow the issue. Ladies and gentlemen, the interesting part about this little research project I went through the other day is all of these articles are taken from 1989. All right. So here we are in 2015, and we're talking about the same issue. And however, there were actually some annexations done back then. Some of the same names you might recognize. Back then it was Mayor Langfelder, of course, Ozzie Langfelder. Jim, his son, is our present mayor, as you well know. In the articles, I saw some guy's name that started with the Z, who was an attorney. It sounded like, well, maybe Zirkle, was that his name? He was involved in some of these things, and it's always interesting when you look at whether it is on the national level or the state level, even at the local level. At times, history does indeed repeat itself. So, on that note, I'm going to introduce and ask him to start the program off, Mr. Jim Zirkle. Jim?
Okay. Thank you very much. Just briefly, I thought it might be helpful just to talk a little bit about the law of annexation and give you just a little bit of background. And what Alderman Donnellan certainly said is correct, that then and throughout Springfield's history, there's always been what I would call a fairly aggressive annexation policy. At that time or during that period, there were a total of 237 parcels that were brought into the city during those approximately 8 or 10 year period. And many of those were hole in the donut, but just to give you a little bit of background, the city of Springfield, like many cities, struggles with how do you have orderly growth, how do you address issues of surrounding areas, boundaries, things like fire protection, things like police protection, and so on. And some of you may or may not be aware, but for example, the city of Springfield has a water policy that requires that when you get water service outside of the city, you actually sign an agreement that says you will annex to the city once you become contiguous. That policy has been in place since the 1950s. And because Springfield is a regional water source and continues to grow in that regard, for example, supplying water and emergency water service, for example, to Chatham most recently, and with the second lake, that policy will continue to be basically one that will be used by the city and has been established literally for decades. Now, in relation to general annexation policy, just very briefly to a little bit of history, Illinois' annexation authority, which is granted by state statute, actually is very limited relative to other states. And I also did just a little bit of research, but for example, in the states of Idaho, Indiana, North Carolina, and Tennessee, cities have the right not only to annex areas that are completely surrounded because of efficiency and services, but actually on boundary areas, they can either through court action or direct municipal action annex areas that are contiguous but not surrounded. Now, Illinois does not allow that. Illinois' annexation authority via municipalities is relatively limited. Virtually the only instance where there can be an involuntary annexation is in the circumstance of a hole in the donut. And again, as Alderman Donnellan represented, has been policy in Illinois for many decades. And essentially, I'll just read from the statute. It says, whenever any unincorporated territory containing 60 acres or less is wholly bounded by one municipality, that territory may be annexed by any municipality by which it is bounded by passage of an ordinance. And that's essentially what we're talking about. And that's a policy that the city has implemented for literally decades. And the reason that the legislature allowed that is because they recognize that when you have patches inside a municipality, areas that are covered, that automatically leads to confusion. For example, with police and fire services, it would be certainly impractical for a small area, maybe a single parcel in the middle of the city, to have to call a county deputy to come and respond to a police call when you have a city police car a block away. And so the city and the county have implemented really what's called a closest car concept, or through 911, to avoid those very things, because you could not call, for example, a deputy sheriff from Edinburgh to come to answer a call in South Grand when you have a police car, a city police car, 2 or 3 blocks away. Totally impractical. And those are some of the reasons why that in order to straighten out jurisdictional issues, the legislature allowed cities, when you completely surround them, for the safety and benefit of the citizens of the municipality and people living in the area, to have these kind of jurisdictional issues straightened out. And that's the entire purpose of hole in the donut annexation policy. And it's one, again, that's been around for literally decades. Now, I think there's been a little bit of a question on the issue about how do you treat, for example, the township issues, and the municipality under the law has really no role in that decision making. Most counties in Illinois, not all, but most, I think about 80 counties have townships. Jim might be able to speak to that, but I think it's around 80 or 85 out of the 102 counties have townships. And in the case of Springfield, we have what's called a coterminous township, which is capital. And so under the law, the state law, not because of the city action, but under state law, when the city annexes, it automatically causes that area to come into another township. So you presently have, I think, somewhat of a dispute between, for example, a Capital or Woodside, or a Capital and Springfield Township on which township it should be in. And the city really has no role in that. In other words, the discussion between the townships is not something the city can vote on or actually resolve. Now, under the state law, there's a process where the adjacent township can retain.
Jim, excuse me, you can pull your mic up, please. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
You're fine.
Can retain the area if they hold a referendum, or, for example, if Capital and Woodside, theoretically, would agree that they would stay in Woodside, there can be an intergovernmental agreement and no requirement for a referendum. And the city really has no role in that, other than we would say it's fine with us. So the process in terms of the annexation, the hole in the donut annexation, is dictated by the state law, as mentioned by Alderman Donnellan, and it's one that's been in place for many years. And maybe with that, at least I wanted to give a little bit of the legal structure. And I guess at this point I would say I would turn it over to whoever is next in line, unless there are maybe other specific issues.
Well, we will have time at the end, once our speakers have an opportunity to give their introduction. Then we'll have time for the audience to ask questions. Alderman McMenamin, if you could please talk about your position and enlighten us this morning, please.
Thanks, Jim. I don't know about that, but I thought that when the current Mayor Langfelder administration
please pull the mic up.
I thought that Mayor Langfelder did an outstanding job by initiating the annexation of the holes in the donut. His father had an active annexation policy in the 1988, as Jim mentioned, and so it's been about 20 years since a mayor has actively pursued annexations, and it's all about money, by the way. When you really boil it down, it's mostly about money and who gets a certain real estate slice of the real estate revenue from these holes in the donut. I thought the reasons for annexation were very self-evident and compelling. And if you look at the map, that happens to focus on Ward 1 area around Lake Springfield, you'll notice that those highly priced residential properties, they're all on city property. Those are leased residential homes for the most part. All those roads are Springfield roads, maintained by Springfield. serviced by Springfield. And so what sense does it make to allow the township to collect the road and bridge portion of the township real estate tax levy? That those monies should go to the city, because the township residents in those township jurisdictional properties are benefiting from Springfield road structure. So the reason I thought this was going to fly through, when the first ordinance got to us, I think it was in July or August, it was the first of what was to be 10 ordinances, and the first ordinance focused on Ward 3 properties. I believe 46, or maybe it was 60 parcels comprising a total of 40 acres. And I thought it was going to fly through the council with a 10-0 vote, because it is so much in the city's self-interest to capture that real estate revenue, that slice that now goes to the township. When you think about it, it is expensive to build roads. It's expensive to plow roads and move the snow and ice away, to salt the roads. It's expensive to maintain those roads, to fill the potholes. The roads have to be properly drained, and that drainage infrastructure is expensive. The traffic lights, if you want to get to the intersection, the traffic lights will be paid for by city money. The street lighting itself, those poles that light the streets, that's city money, taking care of all those infrastructure. The sidewalks, city money. So the township, those holes in the donut, those isolated properties that are entirely surrounded by the city should, out of fairness, pay into the funds that maintain the roads to get them to the township hole in the donut. I mean, when you think about it, by definition, to get to the hole in the donut, you've got to pass through a city road. And to leave that hole in the donut, you got to pass through city roads. So out of fairness, we shouldn't, in effect, have Springfield residents subsidizing that infrastructure for those holes in the donut. And Jim already mentioned the police protection. Typically, the first responder will be a Springfield police squad car, because it'll be the closest squad car if there's some kind of criminal activity or a theft or a burglary taking place on a township hole in the donut property. And the city has to maintain the security of that neighborhood that hole in the donut is located in. And the city provides fire protection, whether it be through a fire protection district or through our own jurisdictional provisions. And I want to just mentally talk about efficiency, because it is more efficient for the city to provide resources and services to an area that's entirely surrounded by city property that receives the same services. And when you look back the last 30 years and you look at the trends of efficiency movement in our local jurisdictional areas, you'll see that for the most part, the efficiency movement has moved city services to the county. And let's just go through some of those city services that are now located in the county government. We've got the Springfield Election Commission has moved to the county clerk's office. The 911 call center, our police call center, has moved to being mostly a quasi-county operation. Our city public health department has moved to the county. The animal control unit has moved from the city now to the county. The regional planning activity is a county operation, but the city pays for it. So these city funds now go to the county to create efficiently operated services that work on the premise of scale of the economy of scale. But now we're talking about a township, and when we want to move some township service to the city, there's been a big pushback, a resistance, and that seems to be a contradiction to what you would think everyone would support. And I think there was a partisan aspect to the vote on the city council, and it should be mentioned in the sense that the Woodside Township is entirely made up of a board of Republican township officials, trustees, and our city council currently is 7 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I think I view myself as an independent, nonpartisan type person. I didn't receive a single phone call before my vote was cast on the issue of whether to annex the properties in Ward 3, but the word of mouth was that some of the aldermen received a lot of phone calls on the issue. And again, it's all about money and who gets the money from that slice of real estate taxation that now goes to the township, which would be better placed with the city. So in summary, I'm just going to summarize here, and I'm going to read this so I get it right. In fairness to Springfield residents, the real estate revenue of the money now going to the Township Roads and Bridges Fund should go to the city because of the many direct and indirect benefits received by those owning the hole in the donut properties. And the city should have jurisdiction of the holes because the city can perform services to these properties much more efficiently than the township government because the city is already providing services to all the property and residents surrounding the holes. We aldermen have to put the interests of the city above the interests of the townships, and our vote should reflect a commitment to the city's financial well-being. And I thought, in conclusion, after the vote was taken a few days later, I think our Mayor Jim Langfelder, good morning, Mayor, who's here this morning, made a really fine comment in the sense that he said that our city aldermen should always be wearing their alderman caps and not their township caps or their partisan caps. So thank you, Jim, and I'll let Ralph, I think I'll give you some material to go after.
Alderman Hanauer.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody, especially Bob and Jim, for inviting me. But they failed to let me know that when I was asked that I was going to go up against 2 attorneys, and I kind of feel like Custer going into Little Bighorn right now. So bear with me. It's an honor and privilege to be on the council and to serve with the people that I serve. I want to tell everybody that, you know, we do take a lot of flack, and we have a lot of criticism, you know, from time to time, and as does the mayor and the directors that we have. But I will say that I have not ran into anyone yet that did not truly care about doing a great job for the city, and I think that's a tribute to them and the city employees. So I think we have a great council. I think we're going to do a lot of great things. Today I'm going to talk about why I voted against the hole in the donut annexations, and because there's been so much that's gone on since then, I'm going to try to. I've tried to think about, you know, what the causes were, so to the best of my recollection, and also I'm going to give you a little reason why I think it failed, and it's not to criticize anyone, but it's just to let people know what, in my opinion. I guess first I need to let you know how I operate as an alderman, and I'm still tweaking things, being new. As I came on, through the initial honeymoon phase, you kind of drink through the fire hose because you're trying to get caught up on everything and how things work and how the council proceeds and who does what. So once we got past that, I mean, the job is extremely rewarding to me, and I really enjoy it. But what happens is we usually get the agenda a couple days before the council meeting or a committee of the whole meeting, and I always look at what's on the first reading, and I kind of play a little game with myself because I don't know if Jim does this. Jim does things a little different, I think, than I do. But I kind of look and say, okay, this is going to be easy. This is going to be easy. I'm sure we're going to get some calls on this. This might be a little controversial, and so I kind of categorize them based on that. And and I try to get as much information, especially on the ones I believe are controversial. I try to look at both sides, try to get both sides of the spectrum, and to get as much information as I can, because quite frankly, and it's that way on all of them, because when Jamie comes up to me and asks me a question, or any of the press, Will or anybody, I don't want to sound like an idiot, and I want to know the subject, right? So I think a lot of people are that way. But I think that when this came in, I looked at it, and originally I think I remember thinking, well, this should be a no-brainer. I'm like, Joe, this is a no-brainer. I didn't think it was that big a deal. And then I started getting the phone calls, and I started getting the emails, and I got to tell you, they must be afraid of you, Joe, because me being a newbie, they were all over me. It was like sharks in the water, and I got a lot of emails, and I got a lot of phone calls, and so I really I had to dive in, because I thought, like I said, I thought this was going to be a no-brainer. So I had to really start doing some fact finding. I was making phone calls myself, and one of the things I found out, that basically, in my opinion, we, the city, did not do a good job of selling this to the people. And I think that if I was a person and I was just told that basically we're going to take you over and it's the law and there's nothing you can do about it, it'd make me awful mad. And I don't think any of you guys would appreciate that either. Am I wrong there? I mean, you know, you don't like to be forced to do things. So nobody's nodding their head, so I might be in trouble. So, and then I started getting calls from the Woodside Township Board, and you know, one of the things I was really surprised to learn was that the city never sat down with them. Now think about that. You've got a bunch of elected officials, and we were going to take over part of their areas, and no one ever sat down with them. Now, as an alderman, I can tell you, if the state was to come over and take over something from the city, and they didn't sit down with us to talk about it, I would be hot. And I'm usually a pretty calm guy. And I would not be happy at all. And I don't think that, I just don't think that it was, I don't think we gave them the respect that they deserved to do it, to sit down and talk to them. I got calls from businesses. Businesses were going to be impacted by the higher sales tax. They threatened to move. If you can take us over, we're going to move. We'll move back. We'll move out in the county. I believe the tavern licenses, the liquor licenses, they're higher in the city than the county, and of course the property tax is going up. People were concerned about that, and quite frankly, the homeowners just didn't like being told that they were going in without having any say-so at all. It was funny because at the council, I can't remember what the sign said. I don't know, Jim, if you remember, but a lady came in with a sign, and it said something like taxation without representation, or
that was it.
Remember, is that it? It was kind of, that was the first time I think I saw a sign, well, I guess with the Bluffstone, but that's a whole nother deal, but a lady, a homemade sign. So I totally understood where they were coming from. Some of the calls, I even got calls from people in Springfield, and the biggest, they were concerned about, I can't get my streets repaired now, and you're bringing in areas that streets are worse than mine. Are they going to go in front of me? And I will say that Director Mahoney does a great job, but he, as he would say, there's a lot of streets that need repaired that we haven't gotten to. The sidewalks, there's places in Springfield that don't have sidewalks. You bring these in, are they going to get sidewalks before us. You know, basically the attitude from people were we have a hard enough time keeping up with the infrastructure needs and the city needs that we have currently, and we're going to add more to it. So, and oddly enough, somehow I even had a call about a lady concerned that it was going to delay her snow removal even further. So everybody's snow removals, their street's the last one that ever gets plowed. So Director Mahoney's going to take care of that, by the way. Mark Mahoney's in the back, so he's got a great plan coming up.
It's called Don't Snow This Year, right?
Yeah, exactly, and it saves our budget too. So, so basically, after all this, I decided I wasn't for this. I think that we needed to do a better job at selling it, and answer, you know, and to sit down with the township board, and so I talked to some other aldermen that they also said that they were getting bombarded and had the same concerns. You know, I can't help that I get calls from Republicans, but I don't when someone from the public calls me, I don't ask if they're a Republican or Democrat. I don't ask if, quite honestly, I don't ask where they live. You know, well, I do ask where they live, because if it's not in my ward, I try to make sure the right alderman does it. But I listen to their concerns, and I will say that this was probably the one issue that I got the most phone calls on.
Can I make a response?
And so, anyway, to do a little bit of Monday morning quarterbacking. And believe me, we have a lot of Monday morning quarterbacks. You know, I'm sure with the mayor, and we all get criticized, like I said. I think that because of the aggressive nature that we moved on this ordinance, and we didn't take the time to sit down with the proper people, and it was because I think that affected it, and. I think maybe if we would have slowed things down, and it would have made a difference. I think part of it was, at the same time, we were dealing with a situation where everybody was new. We were all drinking through the fire hose, and you know, so we were just rushing things through. And I think that what happened, I think the mayor's office did look at this and probably say this is a no-brainer, and you know, so the extra little work that might have been needed didn't get done. So, and I do think, and I don't know, Jim, I think you guys were kind of surprised at the outcome, weren't you? I mean, overall,
to answer, I think the obvious answer to that is yes, and in case Alderman Turner, who was the only ward affected, was very much in favor of it.
Yeah.
And she spent a lot of time, I know, talking with the mayor about it, and the mayor did talk with her at some length to go through. And I would like to respond to one item, just from a legal correctness point of view. The city cannot take over a township. That was never the case. That is not legally possible. The issue is, does it stay in Woodside or does it stay in Capitol? And I don't know if Woodside talked to Capitol. If Capitol was in agreement to keep it in Woodside, there can be an intergovernmental agreement and the problem is solved. So I don't know if Woodside, spoke with Capitol to resolve the jurisdictional issue between the townships.
Right. And we can let Carol talk about what they did.
But the city cannot, cannot take over a township.
Oh.
What we'll do, gentlemen, is we'll let our last speaker, Carol Sutton, do his introductory comments, and then we'll have any of our panelists that want to ask another panelist a question. We'll provide that opportunity, and then we'll open it up for the participants. So, in the crowd. So, Carol, if you would.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. To first direct my answer to Mr. Zirkle, I don't believe there was any contact between Capitol Township or the city of Springfield and the township of Woodside, save for the required legal notice of the annexation vote before the council. As for phone calls, you fight the battles you think you can win,
Yeah.
It's a law. there is no question that is the law that a city, municipality, can annex a property or properties by the action referred to as the hole in the donut. But is it morally right? It wouldn't be the first such law to come out of the legislature that was legal but not morally right. The big reason for that is the people who were most directly affected by this, in other words, the people sitting in those properties, the property owners, some of whom have lived there in, a couple of generations, they have absolutely no say. They don't get a vote on whether or not they want to go into the city. The people who were elected to represent them, in our case mostly Woodside Township people, also have no vote on whether or not they go into the city. Why would the council want to force people into the city? You could almost bet serious money that that's going to be a vote against them the next time they stand for election. People make choices. It's a free country. I keep reading this anyway. Some people choose not to live in the city. Higher taxes, in commercial examples, different codes, inspections fees, licenses, even schools play a consideration in this. No significant difference would have been enjoyed by the people in this targeted group of 60 properties or whatever had they been annexed into the city. No significant difference in the services they have been receiving. That may not be the best thing in the world, but that's the truth. People around the lake who were previously forcibly annexed into the city in renewal of their lake lease, their 99-year lake lease. Several years ago, there wasn't a township board meeting go by that we didn't have 1 or 2 annexation petitions from people to annex into the city, and it was lake property, largely the Hazel Dell area, which is, their lease were coming up, and to get their lease renewed, they had to annex to the city. Nice bit of leverage there. They're still waiting for their sidewalks, their curbs, their gutters, their street lights, and services like this. Now, they may be continuing to get the same amount of snow removal, but in the area where I live, which is roughly a mile south of Toronto Road on the west side of the lake, or west side of the interstate on the north side of the lake, Woodside Township takes care of my roads. If they're not by 4 o'clock in the morning, if it's been snowing all night, it is a rare, rare thing. It's very easy to tell when you've driven from our jurisdiction into city jurisdiction. And Mark, that's not a slam against you. You got a lot of roads and only a finite amount of time. When we get out there and we attack it aggressively. But there is a lot of intergovernmental agreements out there. Hochester Road, Hexter Road, if you've lived here a long time, is just north of where I live. It changes names and jurisdictions, I think, 3 times between the interstate and where it ends over near Girl Scout camp. The October attempt to take 26 properties amounted to just about $2 million in fair market value of assessment. It would have taken just over $78,000 in annual taxes away from Woodside Township. Now, that's not a lot of money to the city of Springfield, budget-wise in proportion. To the township, it's a piece of equipment, it's part payment on a salt dome, something like this. It's a lot of money to us. This is why we were very, very adamant against it. Just taxes, no services. That's all they had to offer these people that were coming into the city. No change in services. They say that people vote with their feet. Give you an example. If I were to throw the numbers 82 to 74 out to you, you would think, oh, he's talking basketball. Well, actually, I'm talking about residential, single-family, new construction building permits this year. Chatham, 82, Springfield, 74. There's a reason why people don't want to live in the city, and I cited some of them.
It definitely isn't for their water, though.
Well,
Chatham
that's
water.
probably true, but I'm in the Chatham Fire District and the Chatham School District and the Library District, and I have city water, I have city electric, I have a city mailing address. And praise the Lord, after 28 years, we're getting sewers soon. We just wrote a check recently to the Springfield Metro Sanitary District. They're giving us the sewers, not the city. The school, the sanitary district is. But forced annexation is quite literally a textbook example of taxation without representation. The people have no choice. The law is against them. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Any comments from either Jim Zirkle or Joe McMenamin?
I've got a few.
Here we go.
You know, I think it makes sense, Mr. Sutton, that your road gets plowed real quick because you've been on that township board for 20 years. So I think you've got some pull, and I think you just proved it. So that's kudos to you that you got some good services.
I've lived out there for longer than I've been on the township board. And the neighbors who have lived there longer than I believe Bob Gray in the back of the room is one of them because he lives across the street from me, will tell you that those roads are always plowed before people get out to go to work in the morning.
And
usually
my road gets plowed, they say it's because I'm an
driveway.
alderman. It was just kind of by coincidence, but, you know, but my main point.
That was a perk of being an alderman, did you, Jim?
I didn't hear the question, Ralph. What was that?
I didn't hear a question either, but
Go ahead, Joe.
Just a few facts, and you pointed out $78,000 would go from the township budget to the city budget. I think the estimate was if we had done all 10 wards, that the city would gain roughly $500,000 to $1 million of additional revenue. So it's really in the city's self-interest to get that money to maintain the roads that these holes adjoin for the most part. The vote, by the way, for when the first ordinance that got to us, which was for the Ward 3 holes in the donut, and we're going to do, as I understand it, Mayor Langfellow was going to try to get an ordinance for each ward, but the vote was 4-6. 4 in favor of annexation, and there were 6 votes against annexation. 6 aldermen voted basically the township interest. Now, as far as the idea of forced annexation, by the way, each property owner did get a notice as to the pending annexation, and we had 2 city council meetings where those public bodies, those property owners were allowed to come to the city council. So there was notice and an opportunity to be heard. Now let's talk about another general principle out there, which is democracy. The will of the majority should prevail. One of my first experiences with holes in the donut was when my wife and I owned a property on the near west side of Springfield, near Sacred Heart Griffin, what's now Sacred Heart Griffin. And there was what seemed like an old country farmhouse on Monroe Street, and it was a hole in the donut. And the owner there was well known in our neighborhood, and it was the only hole in the donut. It's just a single family home on Monroe Street across from Grant Junior High School. And this guy, he had his own jurisdictional property there, and he loved fireworks. And it wasn't just 4th of July. He would do fireworks different times of the year, middle of the night, and it was disruptive to older residents, seniors, and it was disruptive to young families that were trying to put their babies to sleep, and it was disruptive to those that have to get up and work the next morning. But this guy, he had a hole in the donut, a property there, and you know, sorry, SPD, Springfield Police Department, you don't have jurisdiction here. I'm township. And the point is that neighborhoods should have some exercise as to uniformity of code provisions and so forth. So that I'm trying to give an example where in that situation the neighborhood did not appreciate this hole in the donut and this gentleman that wanted to do fireworks. So that's just kind of a response to the democracy idea about whose will prevails, an isolated individual property owner or the general neighborhood and their ideas about what's appropriate in the neighborhood. So, thanks.
Okay, we're going to ask Alderman Hanauer. He said he wanted to respond to that, and then we're running short on time, so we're going to open it up to the participants in the audience. So, Alderman Hanauer, please.
Real quick, I understand the money aspect, and it looks good to the city, and I see Director McCarty wearing his green money tie back there. So, but keep in mind, you know, I don't know, you know, we may get $1 million in tax revenue in from this, but it may cost the city to get these streets and the infrastructure up to code. It could cost us $5–10 million. Is it really worth it? And I guess that's the study that needs to be done. You know, I mean that's that's simply it. Just because we're getting money doesn't mean that it's a good investment for the city. We have to look at it from what it's going to cost us to get the roads or the infrastructure up to our codes. And if it's more, it doesn't make sense to do it.
Thank you. Questions from the crowd, our audience? Yes, sir.
Just a short answer to this, but how did these holes in the donut come to be in existence?
The question was, how did the holes in the donuts come into existence? Any of our panelists care to address that one?
I would say that the city grew around them is how it happened. And, you know, annexation, property being moved into the city. Sometimes that property had nothing on it, and then homes were built there. But just, you know, it's kind of like it oozed around them, and it's.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. The city just grew up around it. Good point. Another. Go ahead, Jim.
Just to make one comment. That is the reason why, sir, that the legislature put the law into place to begin with, because this is not a problem just of Springfield. Think of the Chicago area. Think of the municipalities throughout the state. This law applies throughout the state because of the very issue you're raising, where there would be kind of a hodgepodge of growth, thereby leaving little isolated points that perhaps were still in the county, but completely surrounded by the city, leading to jurisdictional issues like police or fire or sewer, all these various questions that we've been kind of talking about here. So the legislative response was to allow a city to solve that problem through this hole in the donut process. And so it was, this policy was because of the issue you're identifying, which is cities don't always grow uniformly.
Next question.
More comment on that question.
Right over here.
I guess I'm trying to reconcile some things and just make sure that I'm hearing things correctly. But in terms of, you stated that they would get no significant change in service. So they're getting snow plowing, they're getting some services now, yet they're not paying into the city for them, is kind of what I heard. I heard that if you're an alderman, you represent the people who elected you to office, and you serve the city. So if any decision-making is, how do I get elected next time, I don't see how that should even be a consideration. And I guess the other thing that I was thinking was, perhaps that neighborhood is not getting improvements in their sidewalks and improvements in their roads and improvements in their lighting because there is a hole in the donut. And how do you plan for that? How do you do that and say, we recognize that this neighborhood is rated a #1, it should get streets, but I have 5 houses in the middle that I can't legally fix that sidewalk. So it just seems to make a barrier to having a comprehensive plan to improve the services that if they were in the city, they would then be paying for. Those are, am I hearing this right? Am I understanding this right?
Okay, she mentioned several things, and due to the fact that this is being recorded and we don't have a mic in the audience, if one of our panelists is going to address one of her issues that she brought forward, please repeat which part you're going to speak about first.
Well, I'll address the part about, do we provide more services when the annexation takes place? And I think we definitely do. I represent an area near MacArthur Boulevard that adjoins Woodside Township, south of Highland Avenue, and there's quite a few homeowners there, and they're having an abundance of criminal activity in that neighborhood. And when we had a neighborhood meeting and we had representatives of the city there, including for housing enforcement and from the county admitted that they do not have the housing inspectors nor the strength of code that we have in the city code to come down on some of the landlords that were allowing activity to take place in their rental properties and housing conditions that were unacceptable by city standards. And so yes, in many instances the city has a variety of services that we can offer to what would be new residents of Springfield if annexations were to go forward.
And maybe I could speak just to that one issue of jurisdiction.
Please pull your mic up, Jim.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Just to speak to that one issue of jurisdiction, purely from a legal point of view, keep in mind the city does not have extraterritorial jurisdiction, meaning we cannot enforce a code or something outside of the city, pointing to the issue that you're raising and Alderman McMiniman was just talking about. If there is a property that is causing a nuisance, for example, in a neighborhood, if it is in a hole in the donut, there's no way to address it. The county does not have the same enforcement mechanism or the same process in place or the ability to really do much about it. And so you're in a scenario where in an environmental context, a housing context, a health and safety regulatory process, then the city cannot address it because it's outside of the city, even though it's completely surrounded by the city.
Jim, if I could take a shot at that.
Please,
the lady
Carol.
asked about services and the payment for services. There are 9 fire protection districts in the city of Springfield. People that live in those districts that don't live in the city are paying taxes to a fire protection district who I believe in all cases has a contract with the Springfield Fire Department to provide fire protection to them. So they're paying for it. It may not be exactly equal to what city residents are paying for it, but they're paying for it. They're also paying county taxes for police protection. And as was mentioned earlier, the closest car concept means that if you call 911 from your house because somebody's kicking in your front door, you may get a city car, you may get a county car. If a state car is in the neighborhood, that car might show up. So you're getting protection that way. And in terms of snow plowing and things like this, I don't think I've ever seen an instance where a plow's coming down the street and he realizes, oh, that house is not in the city, and he raises the blade for the width of one lot. I don't think that's happening. Out in where I live, there are intergovernmental agreements, if you will, where Woodside is plowing city or lake area service roads and vice versa. It's just the way business is done. It's not effective to pick and choose and to do this one and not that one and then skip 2 and do another one.
And then I'm sorry, you had mentioned about voting to, or did you say voting to get reelected? Is that?
Well, Carol had mentioned that might be a consideration for it, that is, and you were getting a lot of phone calls from people who, as I understand it, didn't elect you to be able to sway you on how you vote.
Well, I think that number one, obviously we get phone calls. From my perspective, on issues, we're going to get calls from all over the city. Believe me, people know how to get a lot of emails. A lot more. I get more emails than I get phone calls, and people are not afraid to voice their opinion. And you know, I look at I don't look at. I just got elected. I can't even think about 4 years from now, truthfully. I mean, I'm trying to, you know, I look at each vote and kind of go with my gut on it. And I understand the whole process of the hole in the donut, but I also understand from the people that called and the businesses and the townships that there was a problem with this. And the other big part of this, and I said it earlier, is if we bring in for the $500,000 in taxes, what's our outlay to get them up to code? Is it going to be more? Because right now, the city cannot afford to take on a lot more if it's going to cost us more money. It wasn't. I had nothing. Believe me, there hasn't been anything that I've worried about getting elected 4 years from now.
Thank you, Alderman. Next question from the audience? Yeah, Bob?
No, one more.
Okay, we got time for one more.
I'd like to respond some more on the question of getting phone calls. Again, I didn't get a single phone call against the annexation ordinance. I did get one letter from an affected business that would have to collect a higher sales tax with the annexation. And I understand their point of view, and there is some collateral damage when you make a change of this nature. But any Springfield resident that I talked with on the issue that I initiated the question to, they were all uniformly in favor of annexation of the holes in the donut. And it's a good example of the general interest being somewhat silent on an issue, but a special interest, will become the noisy, the squeaky wheel. And I think we've got to exercise judgment and discretion on how much weight we put to those phone calls.
Okay, Last question.
It's a personal opinion, but I don't believe anybody moves to one location or another because they're going to live in the city of Springfield or they're going to live in a hole in a donut. They move there because school district, they move there because they like the house, they move there because they like the neighborhood, they move there for a myriad of reasons, but it doesn't have anything to do with who they pay their taxes to. Maybe the amount of taxes. So what you all are missing, and maybe you know it, but you're not, you haven't shown people a cost-benefit relationship, that either they're not going to lose anything by being annexed, or they're going to gain something by being annexed. And until you demonstrate that to people, of course their immediate reaction is going to be to resist it. It's inertia, the resistance to move anybody. You have to show that have an incentive, a reason that it makes sense for them to do that. And I think all reasonable people will respond positively if you show a reasonably good reason for them to do that.
And the gentleman's comments were to encourage the city and those involved to do a cost-benefit analysis when proposing the next ordinance. Any of you wish to comment on that?
I think it's a great idea. I think that's a great comment.
I'd love to see it too.
I was going to say, the only thing I would like to just one moment to address is you keep in mind just on purely on the taxes, because this is not a new issue. If you read in the newspaper articles, as Carol mentioned, there's a fire protection district tax. When you come into the city, the tax goes away. And right now, if a person's outside the city, they may be paying 1.3 times on the water rate because they're getting an outside the city rate. When you come into the city, the water rate is reduced. So those things in the past at least somewhat offset any adjustments relating to the taxes. So to address the gentleman's comment, there are taxes that go off, water rates that go down, and it's roughly offset by the city tax rates. And that's been historically the case.
Yeah, and I agree with Jim. I printed out, I happen to know where Bob Gray lives, and he lives in this area. And I printed out, I won't say what his house is worth, but I will say that the tax rate for Bob versus his neighbor was for this total tax rate for all the taxing districts involved. If your property is not in the city, the total tax rate is, according to the year 2014, which is the most recent data, is 7.2986. And if you go into the city, it's 7.5344. And so it's very close, as Corporation Council indicated, and of course the city sewer and water rates would go down. So your suggestion of us putting forward some kind of cost-benefit analysis is probably a good one, and hopefully one that would be considered. On that note, unfortunately...
yeah, but then there's those services that they aren't going to get even when they're in the city.
Thank you, Carol.
Streets, sidewalks, curbs, gutters, things like this.
On that note, unfortunately, we're out of time. I did want to take an opportunity to thank our panelists for their participation this morning. If you'll give them a round of applause.
Good job,
And just as important, I want to wish each and every one of you a happy holiday season, a Merry Christmas, and a very, very Happy New Year. Thank you for coming out this morning. Appreciate it.